it's okay, Paul, I want to start off with this awesome 3-minute, the entire history of Reebok, more than 100 years, I think, in 3 minutes. And if you could like crank the volume super loud. I'm a child of the 80s, so I love the soundtrack on this video.
A brief history of Reebok in exactly 3 minutes. Ready? Let's go. To find the roots of Reebok, you've got to go all the way back here to 1895 in a place called Bolton, England, with a guy named J.W. Foster. Foster was selling shoes to runners all over the UK when he came up with what sounded like a crazy idea. He realized by driving nails into the soles of athletic shoes, runners were getting better traction and winning more races, including races in the 1924 Olympics by runners immortalized in the movie Chariots of Fire. Yeah, that one. Today, that crazy idea is now called a running spike, and the basic idea is still being used by elite athletes everywhere. 1895, J.W. Foster. Hey, that sounds familiar. Ever been to Reebok's world headquarters in Canton? Yep, that's where that comes from. Fast forward about 50 years to 1958 when J.W. Foster's grandsons changed the name to Reebok. This is a Reebok. It's a fleet-footed African gazelle. Google it. We don't have time, because the modern history of Reebok starts here. In 1979, when the Foster boys met a fireman. Nope, not that kind. This guy, Paul Fireman. Paul was selling sporting goods equipment from his hometown of Brockton, Mass, when he went to a trade show in Chicago. When he saw Reebok, he decided to take his life savings and take a chance, buying the exclusive U.S. distribution rights. For the first few years, Reeboks was a couple of running shoes being sold mostly on card tables at road races around the country. But things were about to change, because at about that time, this happened. From church basements to YMCAs, a whole new industry was taking shape. Firemen and a team of young designers saw a need and decided to create a shoe specifically for fitness. And they had a crazy idea. Instead of using traditional materials, they'd make the upper out of soft garment leather, and they'd call it the Freestyle. Business exploded, and the Freestyle became one of the hottest selling shoes in history, and Reebok became a leader in the industry, not just developing shoes, but by developing innovative fitness programs to use them in, and enlisting an army of instructors to do the training. Then in 1989, another crazy idea, and another breakthrough innovation.
This is your pump. Push this little thing here, and you just pump, 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 pump.
The pump was already selling millions when Dee Brown took it to a whole new level at the 1991 NBA Slam Dunk Contest, and soon everybody was pumping up for a custom fit. New innovations and new technologies continued throughout the 90s, and in 1996, Reebok decided to take a chance on an edgy young NBA rookie with his own signature style and a killer crossover.
These are good questions. Very good questions.
It was the perfect marriage of an athlete and a company who weren't afraid to challenge the status quo. That's exactly what happened in the early 2000s when Reebok signed first-of-its-kind league-wide apparel deals with the NBA, NFL, and NHL. Or later when Reebok and Jay-Z teamed up to create the S. Carter, the first signature shoe created by a music artist. Soon after that, Adidas and Reebok would come together. Now, Reebok is finding new energy and inspiration by pushing the boundaries in today's world of fitness, taking chances, doing things differently, with just a little hint of crazy. That's the history of Reebok, and that's the spirit that will drive the company into the future. Kind of like driving a nail through a running shoe.
What a great video.
Thank you. So we're done now, right?
Yeah, that's it. We've crushed it.
There we go.
So you kind of entered that story in 1985.
Yep.
So you were there for a lot of the really fun stuff in the 80s and 90s. You've been there. You left for a while to go to Puma, but then you're back now that Reebok is part of Adidas.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about this role that you have, head of Reebok Advanced Concepts. Sort of, how is it defined? Where do you fit in the organization? What do they expect you to be doing?
Well, how it's defined, we're supposed to add incremental opportunity to the business units, and it's our business units are set up in these disciplines for running or basketball or tennis or whatever, and they're self-contained business units with marketing, design, development, and they're kind of self-sufficient. Our group has the luxury of working across the entire brand, footwear, apparel, sporting goods product. But we're supposed to add kind of incremental or unexpected opportunity to it. And so where we fit in is, quite frankly, we don't. And if we did fit in, we wouldn't be doing our jobs properly.
But like, who do you report to in fitting in?
So I report to the president and Chief Marketing Officer of Reebok directly, Matt O'Toole. And we have a very, I've got a couple of colleagues here, we have a very interesting relationship. because it's kind of the love-hate relationship. He kind of loves to hate me. No, it's we, from a business
That's
standpoint.
pretty honest.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's true. But what's funny is that from a design standpoint, a product creation standpoint, there's this desire to innovate, as Mike Westcott says, and the entrepreneurship and all that. But as we get bigger as companies, it's that process of kind of that eureka and that unexpected opportunity really flies in the face of planning. And so, from a design, you guys as design discipline folks, product innovation folks, and managers of those processes, it's a real kind of balancing act. You need to be creative, but you need to do it within kind of set expectations. And so we're supposed to come up with new opportunities, whether they be in products or process or whatever, and yet we need to also give enough lead time where it can be integrated in. And that doesn't always work great.
And since you're being so honest, how are you measured? Like, do you have revenue measurements where they look at the end of the year and they say, Paul, it was a great year for you, you contributed to X revenues in this business unit and that business unit, or is it more intangible?
It's a lot more intangible. I mean, we work with the Adidas Group, and it's a great German company. We got about 44,000 people overall in the organization. And so the KPIs, the metrics, and all this kind of stuff are very well set. And then we kind of meander along and we go, hey, check this out, and we head in a particular direction. And so it's what we set up. We try to set up these expectations on an annual basis, a calendar basis. But then again, the innovation process is intended by definition to be disruptive. So I think for me, like with the folks that I have the opportunity to work with, I got to be a little bit more practical. But for me, I think when I get to my year in review and my boss is really kind of agitated with me and not real pleased because I've messed up his plans, that's usually a pretty good year.
Well, you've hung on for a long time for someone who sounds like they agitate.
It's like a barnacle. It's like a barnacle out. Yeah, So no, I think I've been super lucky, fortunate. I've been super fortunate. I've been really fortunate. I mean, frankly,
but I guess the reason I'm asking is because I ran into this company corporate innovation person who's sort of new to a role like yours, and she was saying like, yeah, our company over the next 5 years or 10 years, whatever the time frame was, my job is to create 20% incremental revenue growth for the company. And it's like, boy, innovation, it's hard when you set those kind of metrics.
No, actually,
right?
Scott, and I think so we could do that, and we kind of do that with my team. And what we do is there's a couple of different buckets. There's the annual product ranges, and then there's the evolutions of those ranges. And some of that evolutionary, that second stage product is where we can measure kind of expectations from my team and probably from your innovation teams. Whereas the kind of the new launch product, the stuff that is a higher risk, the stuff that has got a longer lead time and all that, that's over and above what you set as kind of baseline metrics. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about this graphic and with product innovation at the center of it here?
So and I think Diane mentioned it pretty well just in this last conversation. Product innovation used to be pretty siloistic, particularly when I started in the early days for Reebok. You had your product marketing, you had design, you had development, which is engineering or quasi-engineering in the sporting goods business, and then the product process. And it was pretty static because everything was kind of hard copy mail, faxes, and telex, and things like that. I think with the Internet of Things and with the fact that information is kind of omnipresent, and with our mobile phones and stuff, communication is just around, And so product innovation went from this kind of discipline, these buckets, into a product innovation being kind of the center focus, the bullseye. And around that are all of these kind of disciplines that need to kind of plug in at various times with varying degrees of importance, depending upon what cycle it is, how risky it is, how known or unknown the ingredients and the different components are. And so it ends up being a spectrum.
And how would you situate relative to this graphic the existing businesses, not just at Reebok, but at any company? Like, how do they relate to this graphic? Because you have, I'm sure, guys who are selling basketball shoes and are like, my goal is to increase sales of basketball shoes X% this year. And yeah, they want innovation if it can help them with that goal, but maybe they're not as risk tolerant
Most certainly, yeah.
as you might be. So
Yeah.
how do they relate to this?
So they, and what's interesting is that, they relate to it the same way. They relate to it with the same kind of interfaces that we do, but with different priorities. And this is true from my perspective in sporting goods, aerospace, any kind of product where the focuses have different relative importance. As an example, you talk about the folks who have got an annualized business they need to protect and then incrementally add to. So their consumer insights would play a much bigger role. The identification of the population they want to address, those would play a big role. Subject matter experts may play a more minor role because they're not looking for new expertise out in the field, whereas the design, form, function, and the consumer experience play a huge role. So it depends on the amount of risk and the amount of defined opportunity versus the stretch they want to do, where they may fall in the prioritization of those buckets.
I guess I'm just getting at this, what I feel like is sort of an essential truth of big companies, which is that they often will look to innovation and say like, oh, you can help us, your innovation team can help us grow sales, but then when they start thinking about, well, what risk am I willing to take on a new product, whether it's the pump or whether it's,
So no, Scott, that's actually that is a super good point, because what happens is that everybody, and innovation is probably, I think, one of the most overused terms in the entire universe these days. No disrespect, but it's one of those things where everybody wants to be super innovative until you get out kind of on that tethered edge where you're really being innovative, and all of a sudden you're kind of out there alone. And if you're out on point doing new product creation, new innovation, that can be pretty risky because you're setting.
Well, certain products are going to fail.
Oh, we got a bucket full of those. Yeah, I mean, and I think from our side. Our job is actually to fail, probably not as publicly and as catastrophically as other businesses who are in the public spotlight. But yeah, we got to, it's almost like riding a bike. Learn how to ride a bike. If you're not really falling down, you're probably never going to really learn.
What's the biggest failure that people talk about at Reebok where they bring it up? I'm just asking because.
This is completely off topic, by the way.
Yeah, it's totally off topic. But a lot of times, people say, oh, we should celebrate failure, we should learn from failure. And they're like, well, so when have you actually, tell me about a failure. And they're like, oh, well, gets very quiet all of a sudden.
Oh, yeah.
But internally, I'm betting that people will bring up, well, remember that product as the example of, let's not be too risky.
No, well, they actually, you'd like to think so.
Mm-hmm.
What happens?
They forget the failures?
Of course you do. Yeah, and it's kind of self-protective, right? That way there you kind of keep your job that way. You don't want to say my job, and I worked with Kim Blair out there for a long time. Hey, Kim. And one of the things we did back in the day, the AMP shirt with SLD and Textronics and stuff, colossally great product.
The AMP shirt?
It was. You can ask Kim about it later. Phenomenal. It was probably 10 years, 12 years ahead of its time. It was a huge innovation. A wired shirt that we were doing with the NFL in the early days. And it was a smart shirt. It was really cool. And people were like, that's awesome, until we actually went to use it, and people were frightened because, oh my God, it might fail. So one of the things with the product experience is that the risk of failure, from my experience inside of the sporting goods world, is part and part. You got to be willing to do it. You got to be willing to take a few knocks. And if you really and truly are, I mean, it's not pleasant, but it's informative, and you learn a lot, and you'll live through it. I mean, well, your career may not, but you will.
Okay, just one follow-up about the AMP shirt. Was the lesson you were just too early, it was too expensive, didn't fit a customer need? What was the top-line lesson of that?
I think ultimately what happened was the fact the consumer, the customer, wasn't really ready for it. They wanted it in theory, but not in practice. As a matter of fact, maybe Alex, if you could, I want to give you an example. We just recently launched a product called the Reebok Check Light, and the Reebok Check Light is a activity indicator for head impact for sports and activity, and we developed it in conjunction with MC10 here in Cambridge. And it's been 5 years in the making. And Alex, can you run that just to give a little background? Check Light is the latest in a long lineage of innovation
from Reebok.
One of the products we were making was a baseball catcher's mask. This kind of led me into how do we understand what's actually happening to the head in this helmet. So that kind of led us into the concussion in the athlete. We are going to try to do something to help people understand what's happening with these impacts. The biggest opportunity for us was to try to identify an impact and keep that athlete from getting a second impact before they had time to heal properly.
At Reebok, we're really fortunate because what we have is we have time to experiment. You have to have the opportunity to experiment. You have to have the opportunity to fail. You have to have the opportunity to learn and progress.
We started looking at some sensors. We took a leap of faith. Let's couple this sensor more closely to your head. Let's take it off the helmet. Let's put it on your head somehow. We started looking at things that people normally wear that might not preclude them from wearing a helmet, such as a skull cap.
People look at check light and they see the green light, the yellow light, the red light. They see how it functions and they go, well, that's pretty simple. That makes sense.
If there's a chance to make someone's life better or make their fitness activity more enriching, that's our job. We need to do that.
Whereas I think that elegance and that simplicity kind of belies the fact that there's so much science and there's so much engineering and there's so much applied knowledge to get to that simple endpoint. It's a real compliment.
Okay, so I'm glad that we segued a little bit into talking about earlier wearable stuff that Reebok did that didn't necessarily work in the market, because a lot of companies would get, if you talk about failure, a lot of companies say, oh, there's no market there, or we tried that before, and here you are again kind of doing something with maybe different functionality that you believe is going to have a big application. So
yeah, so and it's super funny because I mean, we or maybe me, because I'm in charge of the group right now, much to the chagrin of my team, but I got a great blind spot for things that didn't work. It's like, it's all right, it's part of our job, right? And so, but Checklight I'm really proud of. We've actually won the Consumer Electronics Show Innovation Product of the Year this year in 2014 for health and fitness. We were awarded the Red Dot Design Award out of Europe. We've won a number of awards, including Wearable Tech in London and all that. So it's been awesome. And we've gotten great coverage for it and media coverage. And people.
And you mentioned it's something that you collaborated with this startup MC10,
yeah,
so I'm
certainly.
sure that gets a little bit of the R&D effort, outside of your shop, right?
Oh, yeah.
They know about stretchable, flexible electronics. They kind of bring that to you.
Yeah, they know a little bit about it.
And you turn it into a product.
Well, yeah, and so that brings up two topics. That, like, one of the things we do is 10 minutes, we got it. We actually, we kind of are my analogy, kind of the general contractor in any given project. And I'm not an electronics guy by any stretch of the imagination. And so, we'll get the proper subject matter experts in any given topic, materials, raw materials, electronics, or whatever the case may be, even in design and whatnot, and we'll bring them to the table to help create the projects that we need to do. So that worked out really well. But the Checklight thing is another great example. We won all these awards. It's really done very well, and we have got, I will say respectfully, and anemic sales. People are not buying into it. I mean, they love it.
Even with all the press about concussions, injuries from playing every possible sport.
Absolutely.
From soccer
So my analogy is, for those of you who may be as mature as me in age, not mentally, but how many wore seatbelts when they were growing up?
I think I did.
Yeah, exactly. Well, most people didn't, and they didn't wear seatbelts until they were mandated. And so, the Checklight doesn't help you score any goals, doesn't make you run faster, doesn't let you perform any better, but what it does is it keeps you kind of in the game with regards to being informed about head impact. So right now there's a bit of a gap between people acknowledging head trauma and not just shaking off the stars, which we used to do back in the day, and actually, getting assessed and all that. So Checklight is a way to assign an objective value to that. And what's happening is that it's just taken a while for the consumer to buy into it.
Where do you buy it, and what does it sell for?
It sells for $150, and you can buy it online. You can buy it at various Dick's and Sports Authorities and different locations.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the strategy eventually needs to be like a team or a school or university committing to buy it for all their players as opposed to hoping individual parents.
So we've done that. We've done a bunch of seeding programs in all kinds of sports and activities, and we're doing that. And so this gets back to this circle. And I think, kind of like this notion of the consumer. How far do we collectively as product innovators, how far do we lead the consumer, and how far Diane was mentioning about the fact that, you listen to all the consumer inputting, and consumers love to input. But what's funny about the consumers is that they know what they know today on October 1st, 2014. Where are we going in January? Where are we going next year? And what happens is that people take all of their insights, consumers do particularly because they're running by so many product every day, they'll take it from the perspective of where they're sitting today. So right now, we're like with Checklight, we're still full on with it. We're actually we're promoting it into Adidas as well, so it's going to be multi-branded. And so I think ultimately the consumer will come along.
But it's that great question I think startups and big companies run into it of like, how long do you keep pushing to get something to that, adoption inflection point where suddenly like every football player is like, why don't you have Checklight?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's unfortunately with all of the science and all of the tools we have available, a lot of it ends up becoming intuitive, and it becomes intuitive based on your best guess. It's pretty intuitive based on.
Well, and it's relying on corporate politics, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
How long is management willing to support
exactly.
this idea?
And how tenacious and pervasive can you be?
Okay, I want to touch on one more topic, and then we'll get to your question. So this whole thing, I think, was supposed to be about experiences and education, classes, CrossFit, Fit Hub.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Right. So Alex, we'll do this real quick. So one of the things in regards to this conversation, the consumer cycle is super important to us now as a focus in trying to understand that, and it is absolutely on a continuum. And Alex, can you go to the next one? So as we kind of look forward into the future, Reebok's kind of getting back to its heritage in fitness, and when we in the 80s with the advent of aerobics and whatnot, with hard mailings and mail-in coupons and stuff, we developed this thing called the Reebok Instructor Alliance, and then ultimately Reebok University. Now it's gone a lot more virtual and a lot more kind of ubiquitous, and we've got relationships with CrossFit, with Les Mills, which is a global exercise program. We've got relationships.
So Reebok doesn't own CrossFit, but you're sort of partnered with that.
Yeah, most certainly.
Uh-huh.
And again, it goes on the premise where we do something well, or good enough, hopefully, and we go out to areas of expertise, and we kind of create partnerships with them. So
cool. Let's open it up to your questions. My last question, so the Fit Hub idea, would you just talk about that for 30 seconds or less?
So the Fit Hub is actually part of an extension of this consumer experience. And what we wanted to do, we've got a number of them around the country and opening up around the world, and the intent is to take the typical shop and make it almost a quasi-gym, a quasi-experience environment where you can try the product and the consumer can actually engage in a way so they can kind of get an appreciation for what the product's about. And we can and we do that with this thing we'll call the Fit Hub, so that people can get more of a Reebok experience, or what we would like them to get an experience about Reebok from, versus going to the mall and going to a Foot Locker or Finish Line or something like that and see just a shoe on the wall.
How many Fit Hubs are there today?
There are, I'm going to say, globally 120, and if I'm lying, Alex, you can tell me later. But yes, we're opening up more and more every year.
All right, cool. So questions from you. I'm sure there must be some. Yes, over here on the left. How about this side of the room? It's low blood sugar over here. They can't wait for lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
But 3 questions over here, yeah.
Hey, you guys started your conversation talking about the balance of the freedom to fail in a lab and an innovation team versus alignment with strategic objectives or expectations even. So my question is really about maybe a semi-autonomous lab or innovation team environment, how much of your pipeline of projects is generated by kind of very self-generated explorations around a concept or a technology versus answering a question posed to you by one of your partner business units?
It is absolutely a balance, and that's not being ambiguous. We'll have ideas on certain, we call them platforms, of materials and or how to create something. And we'll have ideas on how to utilize those creation processes in a way that can take advantage of the materials or the physical makeup or whatever. But then as we introduce it to the consumer focused group or to the market, the business unit leaders, they'll have they always have advice for us and insight. And we listen and consider all of it, but we don't act on all of it. And so that's part of the intuitive kind of balance that you have to do, and you got to do it in a way that is enrolling and encouraging, but also a little bit distant, because otherwise you get wander on the axle trying to address all these ideas. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay. Looks like there was another one just up a little bit here, in the red.
Hi there. You had mentioned that sometimes you just have to go through with something and take the knocks for it. If you're dealing with a risk-averse organization, what techniques do you use to convince the executive team that they should really move forward?
Truthfully, I take all the risk, personally. And I assure them that when the parade starts, they'll be leading the parade. And if in fact it's a no start, then I take full responsibility. And so if we, at a personal level, if you can convince your committee or your supervisors that you're willing to take the risk and you're willing to absorb the lack of momentum, then in my experience is that it works out pretty well.
But sometimes aren't you asking them for resources or funding, and so that's probably part of the discussion?
Yeah, so we, go ahead.
If funding is not the issue, but you have, if funding is really not the issue and you're dealing with the executive team, I mean,
Yep.
the senior most executive team in a very large organization like
Yep.
Reebok, right? Sometimes there's that mentality of, things aren't broke, don't fix them, so why should we take such a huge risk with the product? Yeah, maybe it'll generate, or maybe it'll give us, 2% more market share, but do we want to take that risk?
No, and so there's in that, like I'll report to the Adidas Board of Directors on many of my projects that my team and I are working on, and the ones that I can assign kind of incremental value to, those are what I call the evolutionary products, and those are a little bit less risky, a little bit more defined, even if they break the typical product calendar cycle. But the ones that are super risky, and the ones that are, sometimes I won't tell them for a while, just kind of spend the money quietly. And then the ones when I do tell them, and they kind of bristle at it, my team's really, really good, and I'm really fortunate. So when my team brings this stuff to me, and because I don't really do much, and so when they bring it to me, and you go, this really makes sense, then you got to find ways to get the support. And a lot of things that I'll do, and this has worked for me a lot, knowing the audience, knowing the personality you're speaking with, and knowing kind of what buttons to push to get a reaction, or how to avoid pushing some buttons so that they can feel comfortable. And so it's almost like a little bit of a game of kind of strategy on how you present the projects. And so it gets down to the person and your experience with that person and what they want to hear.
So your team, it sounds like you have an annual budget that you kind of can discretionarily spend.
Yeah.
How big is your team?
Right now we have 30 people on the team, and we do everything. We even have, and thanks to Alex and Danielle, I have product marketing folks on my team, so we're kind of like our own little business unit, because one of the things, and Diane said this very well, storytelling's huge, and so all of our consumer experiences and whatnot. If I hold up an item and say, here's the item, it gets pretty boring. But what my team does is we create these stories. And it's our own interpretation. Sometimes the stories get through the filters and are used. Sometimes they're just our own way to convey the message and whatnot. But definitely the storytelling and the embellishment of the priority in a given project is a super big deal. It helps to make the decision makers above me feel more comfortable that, hey, this is kind of, I mean, we're lucky. We live in the world of sporting goods, you know, and it is not nearly as sophisticated nor as serious as some of the industries you guys are in. So you can have fun with it. You know, it's sports and it's participating. So we can really tell these engaging, fun stories.
Was there one more question? Let's see if we can get to it in our remaining time.
Yeah.
Quick question and quick answer.
Yep. Sorry.
So when we were talking about the education panel yesterday, one of the things that we mentioned was how challenging it is for companies to hire students because they want to be entrepreneurial, except for your industry. Mm-hmm. It's probably replaced automotive as the aspirational industry for many of the design fields. Mm-hmm. And I think because of the fast turnaround you guys have, it's almost part of the maker movement because they can see the potential of it so quickly. So what are you doing to work with education, because you have such a big influence on the aspiration of not only industrial design but communication, graphic, interior design for retail. Mm-hmm. So are you all aware of that in the industry, how powerful you are as a motivational force?
Well, I think the industry is pretty powerful. I'm not sure we are. You know, like I said, we're pretty lucky. We're able to make a bunch of stuff, and some of it goes well. But we are engaged really regularly and very consistently with a bunch of the educational institutions. We're lucky to live in Boston. This is a pretty good place for education. And we have relationships around the world, including with our colleagues over in the Adidas Innovation Team, which is the equivalent of the Advanced Concept. Well, actually, they're a little bit less than us in Advanced Concept, but you understand that. So the Innovation Team. So we do work with the educational institutions in all kinds of different disciplines, and it's great. It's really it's pretty humbling and it's pretty informative, because you know younger folks coming out today, when they're interested in a discipline, boy, they can dog at it more so than anything we ever considered in the early days. Yeah, and they're.
All right, I think that's going to have to be our last question because of lunch. But please help me thank Paul Litchfield from
Thank you
Reebok.
very much. Thanks very much.